Who was King Henry V of England, and what impact did he have on the gargantuan struggle known as the 100 Years' War? Let's find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. Henry of Monmouth was born on the 16th of September 1386 at Monmouth Castle in southeast Wales. His mother was Mary de Bohun, the daughter of the 7th Earl of Hereford, and his father was Henry of Bolingbroke, who was the son of John of Gaunt, Earl of Lancaster, himself the third surviving son of King Edward III, the king who had started the 100 Years' War with France in 1337 by claiming the French crown, and who had since brought England's enemy to its knees with spectacular victories on land and at sea, such as the naval Battle of Sluys in 1340 and the Battle of Crecy in 1346. Despite these spectacular victories, Edward never managed to secure ultimate victory over the French, despite his son, Edward, Prince of Wales, known as the Black Prince, winning another famous victory over the French in 1356 at the Battle of Poitiers, at which the King of France, John II, was taken prisoner. The Treaty of Bretini, signed in 1360, was the zenith of Edward III's reign and saw an enlarged Aquitaine, effectively the entire southwestern quadrant of France, ceded to the English crown. Edward's good fortunes did not last, however, and in the following decades, Charles V, who succeeded John II, led a French fight back during which land and castles were gradually regained from English control, thanks to shrewd political manoeuvring, alliance formations, and military skill. Meanwhile, Edward III and his son soon began to suffer from health problems, which hampered their ability to launch effective military campaigns. The Black Prince died in 1376, followed by his father Edward III the following year. This put the prince's son Richard II on the throne, aged just 10, and the next decades would see England consumed by domestic problems such as the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. During his reign, Richard came to terms with King Charles VI of France, and they signed a truce agreement in 1389, which they later extended, securing an uneasy peace between France and England that would mostly hold until the reign of Henry V. In 1399, noble resentment towards Richard II boiled over, and Henry Bolingbroke, who had been exiled by Richard, returned to England and immediately received immense support from nobles across the country who had been alienated by Richard's tyrannical rule and harsh reprisals against the lords who had challenged him earlier in his reign. Though Henry initially claimed that his only aim was to restore his rights as Duke of Lancaster, his campaign gained him such power and support that when Richard II returned from Ireland and was unable to muster a campaign to oppose Bolingbroke, Henry was in a position to depose Richard and claim the crown for himself, which he did, imprisoning Richard, who later died in mysterious circumstances. This was an unprecedented event in post-conquest England, as Henry Bolingbroke was not in line to the throne, yet on October 13, 1399, he was crowned at Westminster Abbey and became King Henry IV. In a matter of months, Henry of Monmouth had gone from being the heir of a disinherited English duke to being the heir apparent to the Kingdom of England itself. As in the months following his father's ascent to power, Henry, now aged 13, returned from Ireland, where he had been held as a hostage by Richard II. The former king had treated Henry well, and the future king was not to forget this. During the week of his father's coronation, he was created Prince of Wales, Duke of Lancaster, and Duke of Cornwall, Earl of Chester, and Duke of Aquitaine, effectively making him the second most powerful man in England overnight. The young Henry of Monmouth's adolescent years, however, would come to be shaped by conflict, as his father's reign would prove to be relatively short and bloody, and the king, aided by his son, would be forced to fight for the very crown he had taken from Richard II. The first crisis that befell the new king was a full-scale uprising in Wales against England's overlordship, under Owain Glyndwr, who in 1400 launched a revolt and proclaimed himself Prince of Wales, prompting Henry IV to send Prince Henry to campaign in the Principality. Henry would spend much of his time as Prince of Wales combating this revolt, and he received invaluable military and leadership experience from the decade of campaigning required to suppress the insurrection. A more traumatic form of military experience was gained by the young Henry when he was called upon to aid his father at the Battle of Shrewsbury on the 21st of July 1403, where the king's army defeated an army under Henry Percy, who had rebelled against Henry IV. At this battle, Henry of Monmouth fought bravely, but was seriously wounded when he was struck just below his eye by an arrow. It was only with the expert help of the royal physicians, who worked over several days using a device to screw into the embedded arrowhead and then extract it, that his life was saved. However, young Henry would bear the scar of the battle for the rest of his days. From around 1410, Henry began to take a more active role in national government, as the Welsh rebellion began to dissipate, and his father became increasingly stricken by various illnesses which rendered him unable to rule independently. By the time of his ascension to the throne, Henry of Monmouth was a battle-hardened commander who no doubt enjoyed the respect and loyalty of his subordinates and who had gained substantial experience in national government. He would soon prove himself capable of rule when in March 1413 Henry IV finally succumbed to illness, and a month later Henry V was crowned King of England on the 9th of April 1413 at Westminster Abbey, whilst a ferocious blizzard of snow fell from grey skies across London, which onlookers and chroniclers could not decide whether it was a good or bad omen. Henry's energy and determination saw a country that had for many decades been riven by divisions unite under their new king. Henry had Richard II reinterred with great solemn ceremony at Westminster Abbey and brought into his favour those nobles who had suffered after the rise of Henry Bolingbroke. Henry's brothers, most notably John, Duke of Bedford, and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, were also utterly loyal to the king and proved themselves to be skilled commanders, helping to foster a sense of unity and drive in the kingdom. What was clear from the moment he succeeded to the throne was that Henry V was determined to go to war with France and resume the conflict that his great-grandfather had begun almost 80 years previously. Henry reasserted Edward III's claim and insisted that the French crown was rightfully his. And though Charles VI of France, suffering from bouts of madness and leading a country divided between two great noble families, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, desired peace, Henry's demands were so unreasonable that Charles VI had little choice but to reject the English king's terms and resume the war. As negotiations were inevitably breaking down, Henry started preparations for a full-scale invasion of France, and in December of 1414 secured funding from the English Parliament. 4 months later, he secured the agreement of his nobles to go to war against the French. The English landed in Normandy on the 13th of August 1415, near the estuary of the River Seine, and then moved to attack the strategically important town of Harfleur, 3 miles downstream from modern-day Le Havre. The English army, which consisted of 2,000 men-at-arms and 6,000 longbowmen, proceeded to pound the town's walls with 12 great guns. 1 month to the day after the town had been surrounded, Henry ordered a full-scale assault, and the French surrendered on the 22nd of September. Although his siege of Harfleur had been successful, the squalid conditions Henry's troops were forced to live under had resulted in an outbreak of dysentery, which historians estimate killed or incapacitated between 1/4 to 1/3 of Henry's entire force. The English king, perhaps sensing that his force was greatly weakened, and also in an effort to evade a large French relief force which was heading towards Normandy, then chose to leave Harfleur in October of 1415 and head northeast towards the English territory of Calais. The French had raised an army by this time and sought to block Henry's advance by manning the crossing points of the River Somme, which stood between the English king and his objective. Finally, on the 25th of October 1415, Henry decided to stand and fight the French, who were encamped across a narrow valley near the village of Agincourt. What was to follow would be a battle which is perhaps the most famous of the 100 Years' War, and even perhaps one of the most famous battles in medieval history, the Battle of Agincourt. Despite its legendary status, the Battle of Agincourt itself is still shrouded by myth, and whilst the sizes of both armies are still contested, the English army had 6,000 to 9,000 longbowmen and men-at-arms, whilst the French army is estimated to have consisted of anything from 12,000 to 30,000 men-at-arms, archers, crossbowmen, and knights. However, it's unlikely the number of French soldiers was as high as 30,000, as the number derives primarily from English accounts of the battle, which sought to emphasise the extent of Henry's achievement. The Battle of Agincourt, nevertheless, proved to be a great victory for the English, who took on a force much larger than their own, and by a combination of the terrain, the weather, their enemies' arrogance and disorganisation, as well as the use of the longbow and King Henry's tactics, killed as many as 6,000 French, and in return only lost around 600 men. The French, on the other hand, lost 3 dukes, at least 8 counts, a viscount, an archbishop, and a large number of nobles and knights, including the army's commander, the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret. Although the Battle of Agincourt is amongst the most famous battles in medieval history, its strategic impact was minimal to start with, as it did not lead to any immediate English conquests, and King Henry soon left France via Calais on the 16th of November with his triumphant but heavily depleted army, and returned to England, where he was received as a conquering hero in London on the 23rd of November. Although the French nobility had been decimated during the battle, the country did not immediately collapse as a result of King Henry's victory. However, the momentary unity that had emerged amongst France's noble families during Henry's initial invasion had disappeared with the shocking defeat at Agincourt, putting France at threat as much from internal divisions as from external enemies. After concluding his preparations during 1416, Henry renewed his war on France in 1417, this time with the explicit aim of conquering territory through siege warfare, beginning with the Duchy of Normandy. He first captured the city of Caen, and then besieged the duchy's capital of Rouen. However, this siege would cast a further shadow over Henry's character, as when the starving women and children of Rouen attempted to leave the town and pass through the English lines, Henry refused, meaning that hundreds, if not thousands, of women and children died of starvation and exposure around the city's walls. Finally, in January of 1419, the city of Rouen fell, bringing all of Normandy under the control of the English king. This achievement was aided by the fact that the French were racked with divisions at this time between various factions within the French court, particularly the Burgundians under John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, who had in 1407 ordered the death of Louis, Duke of Orleans, resulting in a blood feud breaking out between the assassinated Duke of Orleans' son, Charles, and his father-in-law and protector, Bernard, Count of Armagnac, and the Duke of Burgundy. In 1419, the Duke of Burgundy and Charles the Dauphin, the heir to the throne of France, would negotiate a truce to fight the English. However, as the two sides met to confirm their truce at a bridge over the Seine at Montereau, supporters of the Dauphin murdered John, Duke of Burgundy, in cold blood. This brazen act shocked France and inflamed the Burgundians, who now took the drastic step of making a formal alliance with Henry V, putting the English king in an immensely powerful position. Negotiations now began between Charles VI and Henry V for a cessation of hostilities in what would be known as the Treaty of Troyes, in which the French agreed to disinherit Charles the Dauphin and also sanction a marriage between Charles VI's daughter Catherine of Valois and Henry V, who would become the next King of France after Charles VI's death. This treaty signalled Henry's total victory over the French and was a realisation of the goal that Edward III had fought so hard to attain. Yet Henry had achieved this feat in just 7 years on the throne. Henry was recognised as regent of France, and marriage preparations then began that culminated in the English king marrying Catherine of Valois at Troyes Cathedral on the 2nd of June 1420. The Dauphin, however, would understandably not accept being disinherited by his father, and would continue to initiate a fight back against the English in order to claim his birthright. Henry returned to England in 1420, leaving the English armies in France under the command of his brother, Thomas of Lancaster, 1st Duke of Clarence. However, the French were by this time receiving soldiers from Scotland as part of the alliance between the two countries, and a sizable army was formed, which met the English at the Battle of Bourges on the 22nd of March 1421, at which Clarence's forces were soundly defeated and Clarence himself was killed. This reversal prompted Henry to return to France on the 10th of June 1421 to besiege a number of towns that were loyal to the Dauphin. During the winter of 1421, however, the English king was greeted with good news from back home in England, as the Queen Catherine had given birth to a son and heir, who would eventually become Henry VI of England. However, the English king would never meet his new son, let alone see him grow into adulthood, as after the fall of Meaux, a town loyal to the Dauphin that Henry was besieging in August of 1422, the English king fell ill and died suddenly on the 31st of August 1422 at the Château de Vincennes, just east of Paris. It is possible, and thought by many, that Henry had contracted dysentery during the siege. His death was sudden and unexpected. Henry had reigned for just 9 years, and was in many ways at his peak at the age of 35. The death of Henry V prompts one of the great what-ifs of history, because the French king Charles VI died himself in October of 1422, meaning that if Henry had lived another few months, he would have been crowned King of France. There was a potential for a union of the French and English crowns under an accomplished and driven ruler, and the possibilities of this arrangement are fascinating to consider. Nevertheless, this did not come to pass, and over the coming weeks, the king's body was brought back to England, where he was buried at the age of 35 in Westminster Abbey on the 7th of November 1422. The English then oversaw the coronation of the young Henry VI in Notre Dame Cathedral in 1431, making him the only king of England to be crowned King of France. However, England's chances of victory in the 100 Years' War were soon dashed when their ally, Philip, Duke of Burgundy, reconciled with Charles VII in the Treaty of Arras in 1435, after which the French steadily retook all the English territories one by one, culminating in England's defeat at the Battle of Castillon on the 17th of July 1453, leaving only Calais in English hands. Henry V is a controversial figure who generates both resentment and admiration for his ruthless leadership and drive for war, and his undeniably incredible achievements. What virtually all historians can agree on, however, is that Henry V was one of the most capable and formidable warrior kings of the Plantagenet dynasty, whose victories rank alongside and even surpass those of any other monarch of England. What he could have achieved had he not died so early in his reign will remain one of history's most intriguing mysteries. What are your opinions on Henry V? Was he a ruthless tyrant and a warmonger? Was he England's greatest ever king? Can he be both? We would love to know what you think in the comments section. You've been watching the History Chronicles. Please like and subscribe to help our channel grow. We appreciate it immensely. If you'd like to support our work going forward, then please visit our Patreon page. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the History Chronicles.